10, 9, ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Welcome to part 5 of our video series highlighting the 1/100th scale Saturn V kit from Estes. In this video, we'll be installing the plastic corrugated detail wraps onto the surface of the airframe tubes. Now this hurdle is probably the #1 reason that Saturn V kits get purchased, opened, and then stashed in the back of a closet. Applying the styrene wrap seems to be an emotional obstacle that many modelers just can't seem to get past. Ideally, we'll be able to show you that this step, while a bit of a challenge, can be done simply and reliably with a bit of planning and forethought. Let's review what we'll need for this part of the project. First, we'll need the wraps themselves. There are 6 of them designed to go onto the airframe tube. We'll set the fin fairing parts to the side for later in the project. Next, we'll need our primed airframe tube. We'll also need a bunch of fresh number 11 blades. We'll be using 3M Super 77 for our Saturn V. Now on earlier builds, like the Saturn 1B and the Little Joe 2 that I previously documented on video, I used 3M High Strength 90 spray contact adhesive. That will work just as well. However, note that the Type 90 is a contact adhesive. That means you'll need to spray the adhesive on both surfaces, the wrap and the tube. We'd need to do a great deal of time-consuming masking to do the job right. So I've made the decision to use the Super 77. Not only will it be quicker, it'll give me the opportunity to demo a different technique. If you're interested in how to use the High Strength 90, go watch my Saturn 1B video. It's linked below. Let's do some housekeeping before we go any further. First, mark the front of your main airframe tube. I have heard of people attaching the wraps to the airframe tube upside down. You certainly don't want to do this. That will prevent that from happening. Next, we need to refine the fit of the adapter into the airframe. It's likely to be snug, and it certainly is. I'm not going to try to force it here. It's easy to fix. I've got some 320 sandpaper here, and I'm just going to gently sand the inside of the airframe tube. Next, we're going to take a sanding block. I've got 320 grit on the sanding block. We're just going to take the edge off of the bottom of the adapter base. I'll also give it a little bit of a pass on the flat side of the adapter base. Just take the gloss off of the tube. Let's see how this fits now. Much better. We need to put an alignment line down the length of the main airframe tube. When we did that for the 3rd stage tube, we used this Estes marking guide, and we can certainly do that again. We'll just need to connect lines down the tube. We can also use a longer version of a sanding bar. You might also use some metal angle stock, which you can pick up at Home Depot, Lowe's, or your local hardware store. And we've got a perfect line down our tube. We need to place 3 circumferential marks on the airframe tube where the wraps will be located. The first one will be 3 inches or 76 millimeters from the aft end of the tube. The next one will be 8 7/16 inches or 214 millimeters from the aft end of the tube. The next one will be 18 3/8 inches from the aft end of the tube. I'll have to bring my larger meter stick out. That is 467 millimeters. On our third stage tube, we need to place a mark 1/8 of an inch, that's about 3 millimeters, from the front end, the forward end of that tube. We need to extend each of these marks all the way around the tube. Here's a real easy way to do that. Take a piece of legal-sized paper, wrap it around the tube, match up the ends, put a piece of tape in place so it won't shift, slide it down to the 3-inch point, lock that in place with a piece of tape, and then use your pencil to extend that mark all the way around the tube. Loosen the tape here. Find your next mark. Lock it in place again and repeat that process. For our final mark, we'll use the other side of the paper. We'll need to do one more of these on the third stage. And we're done there. It's time to trim our wrap parts. Now let's talk about cutting sheet styrene. This is thin stuff, only about 10/1000ths of an inch thick. It really isn't necessary to cut all of the way through the sheet. Instead, all we need to do is score the material, then flex the sheet. I'll show you how with some scrap material. Here's what we're going to do. We are going to mark a cut line, and then we're going to use our blade to slide right down the middle of that line. I'm using magnification here. Now the important thing is I'm not trying to go all the way through the plastic. All I'm trying to do is score the material. Once we've scored the material, all we need to do is flex it a couple of times and the material will come apart. Before we begin trimming our sheets, note that I've indicated which way is forward on this particular wrap. That's a good idea to do on all of your wraps. We don't want to run the risk of getting disoriented during the build and installing a wrap backwards. Now what we want to do here is trim this top edge about 1/16 of an inch, maybe 3/32 of an inch. That's about 1.5 to 2.5 millimeters. Now a good way to do that is to take something with an edge, and by something with an edge I don't mean your college poetry, and set that up against the raised detail on the wrap. Let's do a short line there. That's a little more margin than I want, so we won't use that. Let's try this ruler. That's more like it. That's just a hair over 1/16 of an inch. So let's use this ruler's edge and draw a cut line. Looks great. I'm going to extend this just a bit on both sides. Our next cut line will be 3 inches below that, or about 76 millimeters. Those two positions are marked. Let's connect them with the long ruler. We can go ahead and cut those lines with a sharp blade. We'll flex that. And our first cut is done. Let's do the other side. Let's do a quick test fit of this wrap around our airframe tube, and we can see that this is clearly too long. We'll need to cut off a generous margin on each end of the wrap. When we cut the ends of the wrap, we'll want to cut each end just a hair long and then refine the fit. This initial fit shows that each end is just about a millimeter too long, so I'll shave just a sliver off of each side. That fit is perfect. This is our first stage intertank wrap. It represents the component on the real Saturn V that connected the liquid oxygen tank that was forward with the RP1 propellant tank that was aft. Now it's a little tricky to tell the top from the bottom on this particular wrap. The way to do that is right here, this detail here. There's a small rectangle over a large rectangle. The small rectangle goes forward. I've indicated that with a piece of tape and an arrow here. The forward rectangle represents an umbilical connection, cables, pipes, and such that would connect the first stage to the launch tower. The aft rectangle, the larger one, represents a personnel access door. This is where workers could gain access to the space inside the first stage between the two tanks. We're going to trim this just like we did the aft wrap. We'll use a fresh number 11 blade to cut this. The fit on this wrap is perfect right off the bat. We're going to skip ahead to the wrap that installs at the top of the second stage. In other words, the wrap that will go at the very forward end of the lower section of our model. I've marked the forward direction here. You can tell the forward direction because the bevel in this cable raceway section is at the top of the wrap. Another way you can tell, the corrugations are at the forward end of the wrap. This flat section is at the aft end of the wrap. The detail on this particular wrap is more shallow than some of the other wraps, and it's a bit of a challenge to get the spacing right for the line. So what I think I'd like to do is simply put a couple of marks at each end of the wrap, about 1.5 millimeters outside of the detail. We'll then connect these lines at each end. We have a fresh number 11 blade and magnification on. Let's cut these lines. We'll trim the ends now. We'll check the fit of the wrap on the airframe tube. Just a bit long, so we'll trim a bit off. That's a really good fit on the end of the tube. Let's chat real quickly about why we skipped over the trimming operations on this wrap. This wrap, by the way, represents the top of the first stage, the interstage section between the first and second stages, and the bottom of the second stage of the actual Saturn V. Not long after I posted the unboxing video for this kit, I got a wonderful note from a very gifted modeler friend of mine, Jay Claudette. And Jay asked if I had a copy of Mike Mikowski's new book on the Saturn V. And I said, no. I immediately went out and got it, and it's wonderful. It also is going to change how we're going to approach this particular part of the model. Now, let me give you some background. This is part of a series of books called Space in Miniature that have been published over the last quarter century by another very gifted modeler named Mike Mikowski. He's done a wide range of subjects over the years, and he finally made it around to the Saturn V. Now, what does the book contain? Lots of photographs, lots of drawings, all sorts of reference materials to help you accurately build and super detail a Saturn V model if you want to. There are also a number of reviews of various Saturn V kits in a number of different scales in the back of the book. Painting guides, for instance, differences between different vehicles in the Saturn V series. The book also contains a number of detail drawings of the Saturn V that will help you super detail your Saturn V model if you prefer. These drawings were done by yet another very gifted modeler by the name of David Weeks. This drawing in particular caught my eye. It depicts the lower portion of the S2 or second stage of the Saturn V. What's really interesting here is that it shows a border around many of these details that are replicated on our wrap part. If we do something similar to this on our model, we'll accomplish three different things. First, we'll end up with a more accurate appearing model. Second, I genuinely think it will be simpler to mark and cut the lines with this approach. And third, we'll end up with more surface area to attach the upper portion of this wrap to the airframe. Now that we've decided on this approach, the question then becomes, how do we transfer this new information onto our part? Well, the first thing we'll need to do is establish a baseline, this area right here, this line just above the corrugations. This is 10mm Tamiya tape. You'll see a lot of it used in later steps. I'm just going to use short sections of it to fit right above the corrugations. I'm going to peel this end up and adjust that. With that tape line in place, we can now draw in that baseline. I'm using magnification. Again, my head might get in the way. Now, by going back to this drawing, we can determine where some of the vertical elements need to be placed. I'm using the corrugations to help line up the ruler. Now we'll start working on some of the horizontal elements. I'm using this bit of styrene scrap as a spacer to draw in some additional lines. We'll eventually build everything up so that it looks much like the drawing in the book. Now I'll go back in and erase the lines we don't want to cut. We're ready to begin cutting. I've got magnification, plenty of blades, so let's go. The top edge of the wrap is trimmed. Now we'll work on the sides and the base. Because of the waviness in this sheet, I'm going to mark this bottom line a little bit at a time. Now recall that our old cut line was going to be right here at the top of the corrugations. We moved that up 10 millimeters. We'll also need to move the reference line on our airframe tube up 10 millimeters. That's easy to do. We'll bring in a sheet of legal paper. Bring the ends together, line that up on the 10 millimeter mark, and lock the sheet into place. Our new line is in place. Let's check the fit of our wrap. That is going to be fantastic. I'll need to trim the edge just a hair, but this will do the trick. We've cut all of the wrap sections for the lower airframe out, and we're ready to put them on the tube. There's just one more thing I'd like to do. All of the cut exposed edges have a sharpness to them that's not prototypical at all. What I'd like to do is just lightly take a sanding stick and knock over that edge just a bit. This will make a huge difference in the quality of your model after it's completed and painted. We're almost ready to begin applying our wraps, and we're going to apply them from the bottom forward, one at a time. Now, we did such a great job prepping the tube that it is very, very slick. I'm a little concerned that the adhesive won't stick to this surface too well. So what I'd like to do is sand that surface. I'm also concerned that we not damage the area north of that, above that. So what I'm going to do is put some tape around this line right here and sand everything south of that tape. We want a fairly rough surface here, so I'm going to use 80 grit sandpaper. We'll give this a quick pass with a tack cloth. As we mentioned in our first video in this series, we're going to be using the 3M Type 77 adhesive for this particular application. We'll spray the adhesive on the back side of each of our wraps. Now I've attached a couple of tape tags to the front side so that this does not blow around as we spray the adhesive into place. We'll spray this in long strokes, starting off the part and finishing off the part. The solvent in the adhesive will need to flash off for a couple of minutes before we try to apply it in place. You'll know you're ready when you can dip a knuckle into the adhesive and pull it up without any residue. We're not ready yet. The adhesive on the back of our wrap has had about 4 minutes to cure. Before you do this each time, Make sure you're applying it in the right orientation. Let's get started. I'm aligning it with the reference mark. We're applying pressure. As it goes on, we'll slowly roll it into place. Pay particular attention to the ends. And we have a perfect match at the end. I'll just burnish this down all the way around. Pay particular attention to the leading and trailing edges. And I'm going to put a couple pieces of tape. We'll let this cure for a few hours before we remove the tape. Before we start to add more wraps, there's one bit of housekeeping we need to do. These little details at the bottom are the start of what's called a cable raceway. What that is essentially a systems conduit that goes up the side of the real Saturn V booster. The kit provides you some plastic material that you'll use to create the gaps in this between the wraps. What we need to do is mark each side of that wrap. We're using our long sanding bar here. Extend that line there. Let's do the other side of that detail. Now, just to prove to you that you don't need this fancy, hard-to-find tool, I'll do the other side with the Estes tool, piecing together short runs. We can now start on our next wrap. Moving on to the intertank wrap, we'll temporarily tape the wrap into place and mark our tape lines. We can then install the tape to prep for sanding. A little bit of work with 80 grit sandpaper and we'll be ready to remove the tape and install the wrap. After we sprayed the intertank wrap, we put it on the model, taking care to align it with the cable raceway lines that we'd already put on there. I regret I did not get video of that. We'll move on next to what we're simply going to call the big wrap. The important thing here is that we need to align not only the cable raceway details, but we also need to align the personnel access hatch details. Our intertank hatch has this detail right there. That's going to roughly line up with the similar details on the big wrap. We're just going to loosely place this around the tube, get everything roughly lined up, bring it down to the alignment guide we drew on earlier, and then start double checking to make sure that our cable raceway is lined up. It is. Our personnel hatches are lined up. Just as an FYI, this is the side of the actual Saturn V that faces the launch tower. See how this looks over here. We're not gluing it in place yet. We're just doing a simple alignment. I'm going to tape that in place temporarily. Slide it up and down to match that line we placed earlier, and then rotate the entire wrap just a bit to line up the cable raceways. I'm probably making corrections of 1/10 of a degree at this point. I'm then going to tape that in place, and then I'm going to draw around all of the details we cut earlier. We'll also draw a line at the bottom. The protective tape now goes on for the sanding operation. Now, rather than mask all of this detail, what I'm going to do is put a simple wrap all the way around the tube, sand this area, and then go back and sand areas of this very carefully with a sanding stick. I'm now going to use a sanding stick and very carefully sand these areas up here. We'll place some tape tags on the back side of the big wrap. Stick it down so that the back side is up and spray it. A great place to start the application of this wrap is at the top of the cable raceway location. That's kind of a 0 point. From there, it's a simple matter to just roll the wrap on and take care to align all of the pencil marks we made when we traced the wrap. And the big wrap is in place. Let's install the final wrap on the lower section of our airframe. This one, the positioning is pretty simple. It goes at the very top of this airframe tube. What changes here is that the cable raceway location shifts several degrees. So we need to draw new guidelines to align this detail on the wrap. It's very simple to do. We'll bring in our Estes tube marking guide and draw in 2 new alignment lines. When we position this on the model, that detail will be centered between those 2 lines. Our spray adhesive is ready. Same drill as before. We'll spray this material onto the part and let that cure for about 4 minutes. Now at this point, we can go ahead and remove the idiot marking, the unfortunate error marking. I like idiot marking better. And take that off. We will locate our alignment guide right there. And we are going to place the upper end of that cable raceway right in the middle between those 2 lines. And we'll begin rolling this wrap all the way around the tube. And we'll bring the 2 ends together. This mark can come off as well. Let's put a couple of pieces of tape on here. And with that, basic wrap installation on the lower portion of our airframe is complete. I had planned to also cover installation of the wraps for the upper portion of our model in this video. When we reached a half hour, I knew that wasn't going to work out. So we're going to break out installation of these wraps onto this portion of the airframe into a separate video. Thanks for watching.